moon hung high in the sky, casting a silver glow over the quiet fields. Only the sound of crickets filled the night air, a perfect cover for anyone up to no good. But the stillness belied the tension lurking in the shadows. 3 figures crept along the edges of a sprawling farm, their eyes sharp with greed, their hearts thumping with anticipation. They thought they had hit the jackpot. After all, who would interfere with a farmer this late at night? Little did they know, the farmer wasn't sleeping. He was merely waiting, a predator patiently preparing for his next hunt. Out in the middle of the land, under the old oak tree, sat Henry, a rugged man in his 50s. His face was etched with lines that told stories of hard work, loss, and victories against the elements. Beneath his weathered exterior was a mind sharp as a tack. Sure, he had spent decades tending to his precious crops, but he wasn't just a simple farmer. He had seen his share of those who would take a shortcut to riches. And tonight he was ready. Henry had noticed the telltale signs of trouble days ago: tire tracks leading onto his property, strange footsteps in the dirt, evidence that someone had been scouting. He had seen it before. The sting of betrayal and the rush of fear had made him wary. This wasn't just a life of growing corn and grazing sheep. It was about defending one's home. As the darkness deepened, the trio of crooks moved closer. Their whispered conversations filled the void, punctuated by snickers of excitement. One urged. They thought they had a perfect plan. The farmer's house was nestled far from the barn, well out of earshot. It felt like a treasure hunt to them, but they hadn't accounted for Henry's resolve. Hidden behind the ancient tree, Henry listened intently. The adrenaline coursed through him, sharpening his senses. He squeezed the wooden handle of a sturdy baseball bat resting beside him, a makeshift weapon of defense. The bat was not just for protection. It was a symbol of the resolve he felt. Every dent and scratch on it told stories of late-night games with his late son, of laughter and of loss. Minutes felt like hours as the men approached. "Look, there's the shed. Don't just stand there." The bravado in their voices gave Henry a moment's pause. He had a decision to make. Henry wasn't the young farmer he used to be, but inside him burned a fierce fire. With that thought rooted strongly in his mind, he crept forward, muscles tensed, bat poised for action. The moonlight danced on the ground as he moved stealthily, working against the chill that seeped into his bones. He could feel the thud of his heartbeat echoing in the stillness. Just then, one of the crooks spotted something out of place in the otherwise serene night. "Hey," he hissed, his voice low but filled with panic. "It's just the wind," came the dismissive reply, but the unease was palpable. They were on the edge, and instinct was telling them something wasn't right. In that moment, Henry struck, bursting from his hiding place with all the might he could muster. The sudden explosion of sound startled the men, freezing them in their tracks. The first crook, a muscle-bound guy with tattoos wrapping his arms like chains, spun around, eyes wide. But surprise quickly turned to anger as he caught sight of the farmer. He shouted, attempting to close the distance. Henry swung the bat not to strike but to create a barrier. He yelled, voice booming with authority. The desperation in his tone was a battle cry, ragged with emotion but steady with determination. The men hesitated, exchanging glances, weighing their options. They had thought this would be an easy job, an hour or two, and they'd vanish into the night with stolen tools. But Henry's unwavering confidence was daunting. One of them finally decided, and the trio scrambled back toward the cover of the trees, but not before Henry charged after them, a fire lit in his belly. His words crackled like thunder, ringing through the night air. And just when they thought they were out of reach, he hurled the bat, aiming it precisely toward the ground just outside their path. The crack of wood against dirt echoed around them, sounding less like a miss and more like a warning shot. They skidded to a halt, eyes darting back at Henry. "Damn it," one crook muttered, fear creeping into his voice. Henry stood tall, breathing heavily but unfaltering. "You picked the wrong farm," he stated firmly, a layer of pride draping over him like a shield. He wasn't just protecting tools, he was preserving the essence of who he was, a farmer, a protector, a father even in the darkest moments. As the trio scrambled off into the night, hearts racing and minds scrambling for an escape plan, he took a moment to reflect. What had begun as a night of potential loss turned into a powerful stand for everything he valued: hard work, legacy, and home. The tension slowly dissipated, but Henry remained vigilant, heart still pounding. They might return, but he was no ordinary farmer. He had prepared for this. This wasn't just about physically guarding his crops. It was about wrestling the fear that lurked in the mind and replacing it with determination. He stepped back toward his farmhouse, each stride more confident than the last as he mentally fortified his defenses. He could feel the night wrapping around him like an old friend, serene yet protective. He might be alone, but he didn't have to stand down. The next day, he gathered the community. Farmers from nearby lands came to share their tools and security tips. Together, they built a network. Could they share rides, patrol, or simply stand guard together? As his neighbors pooled their ideas and resources, he felt the power of unity suffuse him. Weeks later, under a warm sun, Henry stood in the fields, knee-deep in tomatoes, his heart full of gratitude. He had transformed fear into action. His once lonely battle had turned into a team effort. One evening, as he relaxed on his porch, watching the horizon brighten with the setting sun, he realized something powerful. The intruders may have thought he was just a farmer, easy prey cloaked in comfort. But in the stillness, he had been a guardian, prepared for the fight, steeled by years of labor and life's lessons. And while the moon still shone above the land, Henry understood that the shadows were not places to fear but realms of potential and preparation. If another threat dared to creep into his life again, they would find more than a farmer. They would meet a man who had risen from the ashes of doubt, stronger than ever. With each new sunrise, Henry embodied resilience, and in that sturdy reflection, he understood his purpose had blossomed one rooted deeply in the earth, defending not just a space but everything it represented: family, history, and an enduring spirit that could never be silenced. Under the blanket of a moonlit sky, shadows danced across the open fields. A chilling breeze whispered secrets through the tall grass, while a lone barn stood solemnly in the distance. The stillness of the night draped over the farm like a heavy curtain, making it seem almost peaceful. But lurking in that tranquility were three figures, tiptoeing closer, squinting into the darkness. They moved like phantoms, fueled by greed, their eyes glinting with the thrill of an easy target. "Look at that farmhouse," one crook whispered, the excitement trembling in his voice. "Can you believe the farmer's just sleeping?" The others nodded, smirking, believing they had hit the jackpot. But what they didn't realize, what they couldn't see with their narrow minds, was that the farmer, a man named Tom, was alert, watching every move they made from the cover of his porch. He wasn't asleep at all. He was merely waiting, watching like a hawk, every muscle tense with purpose. Tom was not a man who let his guard down. Years of hard work, calloused hands, and late nights tending to his fields had shaped him into someone resilient, a force of nature. Each day carried its battles against the elements, pests, and sometimes even life itself. But for Tom, those challenges didn't intimidate him. They fortified his spirit. On that particular night, however, he was facing an entirely different kind of threat. Before he had turned in for the night, he noticed the tracks in the dirt, the tire marks that didn't fit any farmer's vehicle. The whispers carried through the fields, tales of thieves snatching tools and crops from unsuspecting farmers. Unlike most nights, his heart was beating a little faster, but he knew he had to be ready. As the intruders slunk closer, one of them spotted the barn door slightly ajar, the warm light spilling out into the night. "There's the stash," he breathed, his heart racing at the thought of easy pickings. Meanwhile, Tom sat still, back pressed against the rough wood of the porch, the glow from the small lantern illuminating his face. It flickered, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. He looked calm, but beneath the surface, a storm of determination brewed. Clutched in his hands was an old shovel, its blade worn but sturdy just like him. "Let's grab the tools and get out of here," another crook urged, excitement bubbling over. But Tom was not just an unsuspecting farmer. He was a man with a plan. As the three men approached the barn, laughter erupted among them, the kind of laughter that comes from the thrill of mischief. It echoed off the walls, but it was only a cover for their fear. They were predators, sure, but they didn't know they had just stepped into the lair of a guardian. Tom held his breath as he felt the weight of the night close in around him. He sensed the rising tension, the moment where chaos would erupt. Then they stepped past the threshold of the barn and he moved. In a sudden burst, he jumped up from the porch, feet pounding against the wooden planks, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Hey!" His shout shook the stillness, reverberating through the night. The three men spun around, eyes wide with shock, mouths gaping in disbelief. The largest one stumbled, his bravado instantly evaporating like mist in the morning sun. Tom stood tall, the shovel gripped firmly in his hands, ready for whatever may come. "You picked the wrong farm," he declared, his voice fierce and steady. The fear that may have lingered in his heart was drowned out by the raging fire of protectiveness. "Back off, old man," the tattooed crook sneered, momentarily regaining his composure. But Tom could see the tremor in his posture, the sweat beading on his forehead. For a brief moment, he knew they realized the truth. They were outmatched. "Leave now, and I won't call the sheriff." "This is your only warning," Tom said, stepping forward, the shovel raised slightly, its blade glinting in the moonlight. With every word, he felt stronger, more alive. He was no longer merely a farmer, but a warrior defending his realm. The crooks exchanged nervous glances, weighing their options. They had come to steal, to take what didn't belong to them, but now they were caught in the web of their greed. Their bravado was slipping. "Let's just go," one of them suggested, his voice lower now, tinged with doubt. The confidence was fading, completely overshadowed by the reality of facing someone who wouldn't back down. Tom pressed the advantage, stepping forward again, each stride filled with unmistakable power. "You think I'm just a farmer?" His voice held a conviction that startled even him. The tension in the air thickened. The larger man tried to regain control, attempting an intimidation tactic. "You think you can scare us?" But his words lacked certainty, like a shadow fading under a strong light. Tom lowered the shovel slightly but kept it gripped tightly. "You might think you want to come back, but I'll be ready. You're not the first to try to take what's mine, and you won't be the last," he said, each syllable punctuated with fierce resolve. As the men shifted, their false courage crumbling, the weight of Tom's words landed heavy. They turned, fleeing into the darkness, leaving behind the thought of potential riches and taking with them the sting of defeat. One of them shouted as they sprinted away, hearts racing, adrenaline fueling their escape. Tom stood there, the moonlight bathing him in its glow, breathing heavy as the adrenaline faded. He had faced down a challenge head-on, and he could feel the power coursing through him, a surge of victory. In the following weeks, Tom's heart swelled with a new resolve. No longer just a farmer, he became a fortress. He reinforced his barn, installed lights around the property, and even enlisted his neighbors to watch over one another. He realized that he wasn't alone in this fight. Together, they were stronger. Every night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Tom patrolled the boundaries of his land, a watchful guardian against the darkness. And with each new day, he shared his story with his neighbors and local farmers, raising awareness. They learned that protection is not just about weapons. It's about community, trust, and standing firm against unjust actions. "There's strength in numbers," he often said, the words echoing like a mantra. The farmers began to unite for mutual protection, exchanging tips on fortification, leaving no blind spots for thieves to exploit. A network formed, an alliance against potential dangers. Sometimes, whispers would drift through the town about the brave farmer who stood up to the crooks. He became known not just for his crops, but as a man of grit and tenacity. People would stop by to lend hands, whether for farming or simply to hang on his porch, sharing stories of their days. One warm evening, as twilight descended, Tom found himself on the porch with old friends, laughing and sharing in the camaraderie that had grown from a single, defining moment. The sun painted the sky in vivid oranges and purples, a canvas of resilience. Then one of his friends asked, "Tom, what's your secret?" Tom leaned back, a smile crossing his weathered face. "I wasn't just defending my tools or land. I was defending my life, my family's legacy. Every inch of this soil means something to me." As they talked, laughter bouncing off the walls, the warmth of the community settled in his chest, and he felt a profound realization. Courage is not about the absence of fear. It is the willingness to confront it, the ability to rise when faced with adversity. Time passed, seasons changed, and the farm flourished under Tom's watchful eye. He learned to adapt to the ebb and flow of life, working with nature instead of against it. And while he remained vigilant, he also embraced the joys of farming, the laughter of friends mingling with the songs of the wind. Yet those lessons were etched deeply in his heart. He knew that darkness could hover just outside the threshold, but now he carried a strength nurtured by community and resilience, a story of bravery that would carry forward, lighting the way for others. One night, as he laid down to sleep, a deep contentment wrapped around him, the kind that comes from knowing you are prepared, you are worthy, and you are loved. And in those moments, as dreams intertwined with reality, he knew he would always stand his ground, an unshakable guardian of his land, his heart, and everything he held dear. The faint glow of the crescent moon spilled across the rows of corn, casting long shadows that flickered in the night breeze. Silence enveloped the expansive fields of Oakwood Farm, where a lone figure sat on the creaking porch, his silhouette nearly blending into the darkness. To the untrained eye, it appeared that old Jim was just another farmer, lulled into peaceful slumber by the rhythm of rural life. But he was far from that. Tonight he was a sentinel, ready to face whatever intruders dared to trespass. Just a few nights ago, Jim had noticed the signs, tire tracks in the dirt near his barn, strange noises echoing in the distance. Tales of local thieves spreading like wildfires among the townsfolk had him on edge. They were prowling the night, targeting unsuspecting farmers, pilfering precious tools and livestock without a second thought. But tonight, there would be no easy pickings. As Jim gently rocked in his chair, he heard muffled laughter drifting through the cool night air. The sound sent chills down his spine, waking every instinct honed from years of hard work on the land. He straightened up, peering into the engulfing darkness, waiting for the source of the laughter to reveal itself. 3 figures emerged from the shadows, low to the ground, stealthy and reckless. They wore dark clothing, a sight too familiar to Jim's experienced eyes. Their movements were urgent, each step echoing their eagerness. One crook whispered, the excitement palpable in his voice. He pointed towards the old barn where Jim stored years of labor, the tools he needed to keep his farm thriving. In that moment, Jim recalled the first time he held those very tools in his hands, how they felt like extensions of himself. Each hammer, each wrench carried memories of repairs made and dreams built. Losing them was not an option. Jim's heart raced, but his mind was clear. He was prepared. With the determination of a warrior, he quietly stood up, retracting the porch's creaky floorboard like it was a loading rifle. He'd never faced a challenge like this before, but vulnerability wasn't in his nature. He moved to the side of the house where a sturdy shovel leaned against the wall, a tool and weapon all in one. He grasped it firmly, feeling its weight and familiarity. The thieves had already reached the barn, their excitement growing as they peered inside. The tallest one sneered, leaning inside, oblivious to the danger waiting just beyond the threshold. They had underestimated the heart of a farmer. Jim tightened his grip on the shovel and took a deep breath, feeling the cool night air fill his lungs. With resolve, he stepped closer to the barn, each footfall deliberate and silent. As they rummaged through his tools, the moonlight caught the glint of metal, his favorite wrench, the very tool that had helped him repair his vintage tractor. Any chance of losing it ignited a fire inside him. Jim's voice boomed, cutting through the soft sounds of the night. The 3 thieves startled, spinning around, wide-eyed and unprepared. For a heartbeat, the air thickened with tension. The taller thief tried to regain control, his bravado erupting in a bark of laughter that trembled like leaves in a storm. Just taking a little inventory, old man. The stench of fear was palpable now. They realized Jim was no simple farmer, and deep down they knew they had stepped into a game they hadn't trained for. "Leave now and I won't call the sheriff," Jim asserted, stepping forward with primal energy. He raised the shovel, its blade glinting ominously in the moonlight. The trio shared panicked glances, uncertain of their next move. Jim's stance was firmly grounded. He was a man with nothing left to lose. He had worked too hard and endured too much to let these thieves take 1 ounce of what he had poured his blood, sweat, and tears into. A second thief hissed, his confidence waning. They were realizing they had miscalculated the night's adventure. Jim pressed on, preparing to defend himself, every instinct tuned to the unfolding drama. "You want tools? I'll give you tools," he growled, adrenaline heightening his senses. With a sudden rush of fierce energy, he swung the shovel in a wide arc, not to strike but to draw a line in the sand, a final warning. The metal clang echoed through the air, piercing the thieves' reckless courage. They hesitated, backs stiffening at the sight of the formidable farmer. This wasn't just a man defending tools, it was a primal battle for dignity and survival. "We can take him," the tallest Crooks said in a shaky voice, futile bravado keeping him from crumbling. But as they crouched closer, Jim locked eyes with each of them, silently challenging the frail thread of confidence that held them together. He wasn't just protecting his tools, he was defending his way of life, the roots he had planted over decades. The glint of determination in his eyes pushed back against their doubts. Then it happened, the moment that would change everything. The second thief, caught in a moment of panic, struck out, lunging toward Jim. Jim sidestepped, using the momentum to pivot smoothly, swinging the shovel around in a defensive stance. It was swift, calculated, a man fully aware of his territory and readiness. In a flash, the crook lost his footing and stumbled back, eyes wide with disbelief. He shouted, a note of fear creeping into his tone. Before they could escape, Jim raised his voice once again. "I didn't build this farm for you to destroy it." He took a step forward, the shovel wielded like a sword, and they flinched back, retreating into the darkness. With adrenaline still surging, Jim felt invincible as they fled into the night, scrambling over the fence as if escaping from a beast. He stood tall, heart racing, breathing heavily, the weight of what had just happened settling in. They had come for easy gains, but they were met with fierce resistance instead. He gripped the shovel tighter, still poised for action. His words rang in the night air, a promise underlined by the strength he had discovered within himself. As silence returned to the farm, Jim lowered the shovel and took a moment to breathe. The gravity of the situation hung around him, but there was no time for fear-only resolve. The night had tested him, but he had stood his ground. He had faced the threat and won, and with each thud of his heart, he felt more alive than ever. The days that followed were filled with a new light. Jim realized he had not only defended his tools and crops, but had also awakened a fierce warrior spirit within him. He became proactive, fortifying his barn and fields, stronger locks, strategically placed lights, and simple alarms fashioned from old equipment. But he also realized he had to be part of something larger. He picked up the phone and called a few neighbors. "We need to watch each other's backs," he said firmly. Together, they organized a community meeting, sharing stories, tools, and strategies. There was a newfound camaraderie among the local farmers, united against the creeping threats that had once lain quietly in the shadows. "Let's patrol together at night," one neighbor suggested. His words struck a chord in the hearts of everyone present, and plans were set in motion. Over the next few weeks, Jim's life transformed. He spent evenings not just tending his crops, but also forming bonds with his fellow farmers. They took turns walking through fields, sharing laughter and stories, and forging a network of safety. And as summer faded into fall, Jim felt invigorated with each sunrise. The once lonely prowler had become a stronghold of resilience, a leader in his community. One afternoon, while fixing a fence, Jim received a call. His neighbor Martha's voice trembled through the line. "Jim, I think I saw those thieves again." His heart raced. "Don't worry, Martha, stay inside." With determination ignited, he grabbed his shovel and made his way to her property, a sense of urgency driving him forward. When he arrived, Martha met him at the door, her eyes wide with apprehension. "I'm scared, Jim." "Let's take a look," he said, ensuring he stayed close to her, ready for anything. They moved cautiously through her barn, the shadows stretching ominously in the fading light. Suddenly, a noise broke the silence, a rustling sound from behind a haystack. Jim's instincts kicked in. He crept forward, shovel at the ready. In an instant, two of the crooks jumped out, surprise written across their faces as they spotted Jim. They had returned, emboldened by their earlier escape. One crook shouted as they turned to flee, but Jim was quicker. With every ounce of strength, he brandished the shovel. He yelled, charging forward. They veered and scrambled away from him as the moonlight cast long shadows across the ground. In that adrenaline-fueled moment, Jim felt a connection to every farmer before him, every guardian of the land. They were all woven into this fabric of strength and unity, and he would protect it fiercely. Chasing them out of the barn and towards the road, he shouted for help. "Neighbors!" His voice carried, a rallying cry in the quiet night. In the distance, headlights flickered on as a few neighbors responded, arriving just in time to see the thieves scrambling away. Together, they formed a wall, a united front rising against those who had come to steal. With the sheriff arriving shortly after, the Crooks found themselves trapped, cornered by the very community they had underestimated. As they were arrested, Jim stood tall, watching as the sheriff cuffed them and loaded them into the back of the patrol car. He felt satisfaction wash over him, but more importantly, he felt gratitude for the strength of the community around him. One of his fellow farmers laughed, clapping Jim on the back. In that moment, he realized the journey had transformed him. He had started as an isolated farmer defending his property, but through courage and community, he had become a beacon of strength, a symbol of resilience for everyone around him. That night, as Jim returned home, the moon hung high above, illuminating the fields he so deeply loved. He looked around, breathing in the cool night air, knowing he had truly become a guardian of his land, a protector of his roots. Over the years, he shared the tale of the thieves with his children and grandkids, imparting not just a story of triumph, but lessons of courage, community, and the spirit of standing tall in the face of adversity. Long after that night, Jim became a legend in Oakwood, a tale not just about a farmer and thieves, but about the unwavering bond of neighbors and friends willing to stand together, side by side, through every storm that life may throw their way. And every time those crooks thought they might come back, Jim would be there, no longer just a farmer, but a man prepared to defend what he cherished most. The moon hung high, a silver orb casting an eerie glow over the sprawling fields. To the untrained eye, the farm was quiet, just rows of corn whispering in the wind, the occasional rustle of a night critter lurking nearby. But underneath that veneer of calm lay a tension so thick it could practically be cut with a knife. In the shadows, three figures crept forward cloaked in darkness, eyes glinting with mischief. They moved cautiously but with a palpable excitement. "This old farmer thinks he can sleep through the night," whispered the first, his voice low but crackling with bravado. The second figure snickered, glancing towards the farmhouse. "Looks like he's out cold. Let's make it quick." Their greed cast a hypnotic excitement over them, drawing them closer to the unsuspecting prize. Meanwhile, inside the house, Jim, an old farmer with deep-set lines etched across his weathered face, sat perfectly still. To the outside world, he might have appeared asleep, but to him, this was a moment of quiet vigilance. He had seen this kind of trouble before. Just a few nights earlier, he had awoken to the sound of metal scraping against his barn door. When he looked out, he saw strange figures lurking around his property. Rumors had flown through the local community about thieves targeting farms to pilfer tools and equipment. But Jim wasn't the type to roll over and accept defeat. No, he was prepared, even if it meant staying up late. As the intruders approached the barn, he slid his hand down the side of his chair, his fingers brushing against the smooth handle of a sturdy pitchfork, a weapon in a farmer's hand. Just a bit of blood, sweat, and countless nights spent tilling the land had taught him how to stand firm. He opened the creaky porch door quietly, like a lion stalking its prey. The opening creaked, and for a brief moment the crooks froze. One of them whispered, wide-eyed and apprehensive. Jim's heart raced, but he remained composed, shadows swallowing his figure. The third one said, trying to mask his doubt with bravado. They seemed uncertain now, danger creeping in as reality began to sink in. Without a moment's notice, Jim burst out from the shadows, pitchfork at the ready. His voice boomed across the quiet field, cutting through the night air like a knife. The men jumped, startled. Eyes wide, they turned to face the farmer. This wasn't part of their plan. The leader stammered, his bravado fading faster than a shadow before the dawn. Jim stepped forward, the pitchfork glimmering ominously in the moonlight, reflecting his unwavering resolve. The crooks exchanged worried glances. This was not the easy score they had envisioned. They had awoken the wrath of a man who had fought too hard to protect his way of life. Sweat dripped from their foreheads as fear began to twist around their hearts. "Just let us go, old man," the second crook pleaded, his bravado shattered. But Jim wasn't buying it. Every farmer knows that a thief only means trouble. Pitchfork was steady in his grip, each word issued with the gravity of years spent tilling the soil and raising livestock. In an instant, the tallest crook made a desperate move, lunging toward Jim. It was a mistake, fueled by panic rather than planning. Before he could reach him, Jim swung the pitchfork with all his might. It clashed against the ground right by the crook's feet, sending him stumbling backward in terror. Jim shouted, the farmer's instinct of protecting his land infusing every syllable. The tremor in his voice became a rallying cry. There was no backpedaling now. The intruders were caught in a trap of their own making. One of them shouted, the confidence completely stripped away. They turned and ran into the night, dashing back to the cover of the trees that skirted the fields. Jim stood firm, planting himself defiantly, pitchfork still poised. His heart thundered in his chest as pride swelled within him. He knew he wasn't just protecting tools. He was standing firm for every late night spent worrying about crops, every challenge life had thrown at him. This was about honor and his connection to the land. After the intruders skedaddled into the distance, Jim took a moment to breathe deep and steady his pulse. He didn't just fend them off. He had defended his legacy, his story etched in every row of corn swaying gently in the wind. But that wasn't the end of it. As days turned into weeks, the encounter stayed fresh in his mind. Jim knew he had to take precautions. He wasn't just going to wait for them to return. That very night, he reached for his old toolbox, that familiar collection of rusted screws and hammers, and began fortifying his barn. He bolted the doors, installed security lights, and even contrived a simple alarm using his old tractor's horn. But Jim did more than reinforce his defenses. He reached out to neighbors, sharing his story over coffee at the local diner. They listened, their eyes widening with concern, and slowly a plan began to form. "We need to look out for one another," one neighbor said, thumping his fist on the table. It struck a chord among the farmers, that unbreakable bond made stronger through shared experiences and mutual respect. As whispers of cooperation and vigilance spread like wildfire, Jim felt a surge of hope. They began to organize patrols, taking turns guarding each other's farms through the night. Each evening they would gather, sharing tales of the day, laughing while also keeping a watchful eye. Weeks passed, and the thieves remained in hiding. It was as if they had become ghosts, slipping through the night, but the farmers of Oakwood refused to cower. It wasn't long before they became a force to be reckoned with, a community unified, each farmer proud to bear the weight of responsibility. One quiet night, while on patrol, Jim glanced at the vibrant tapestry of stars above him, the world below fading into a hushed silence. The camaraderie he felt among his fellow farmers glimmered brighter than any star. Just then, a commotion echoed through the night, a shout breaking through the stillness. The unmistakable sound of fear echoed in the darkness. It was Martha, one of the neighboring farmers. Jim's heart raced as he dashed toward her voice, instinct screaming. He found her out behind her barn, two of the very same thieves grappling with her tools. This was it, their moment of reckoning. Jim ferociously stepped forward, fists clenching around the handle of his trusty pitchfork, every muscle in his body ready for action. "Hey," he bellowed, his voice carrying with a courageous ferocity. The crooks turned, fear replacing the bravado they once wore. They hadn't anticipated this formidable defense, a united front of farmers ready to stand for their land and their kin. One crook shouted, attempting to mask his fear with empty threats, but with Martha beside him, strength coursed through Jim's veins. He proclaimed. The sheer ferocity of his words ignited the other neighbors, who began to converge on the scene, brandishing whatever tools they'd been carrying: pitchforks, shovels, even a broomstick. Seeing the swarm of determined farmers, the crooks' confidence crumbled. They turned to run, slipping through gaps in the fence. Jim and his neighbors pursued, adrenaline spurring them forward. His fellow farmers shouted. As they chased the intruders, their collective determination painted a picture of strength, community, and resolve against those who would prey on the vulnerable. But the thieves were quick, darting off into the darkness, desperate to escape. With a collective roar, Jim and the others regrouped, drawing breath and assessing the aftermath. The barn stood resolute, and rather than defeat, they found victory in resilience. They hadn't lost the battle tonight. They had won a war of hearts. Over the following weeks, tales spread through the community of the night when Jim led his fellow farmers in a united front against thieves. And as seasons changed, so did their fortunes. Trust flourished like crops in a bountiful field, and the very act of standing together solidified their strength. Years passed, and Jim's reputation as a fearless guardian permeated Oakwood like the smell of fresh earth after a rain. Stories of the farmers who stood together echoed in homes, instilling a sense of courage among families. One evening, as he leaned against the porch railing, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jim smiled, remembering that fateful night of confrontation. His heart swelled with pride as he absorbed the glow of community. With every whisper of the wind, it echoed around him. This was more than about guarding tools or fields. It became a saga of empowerment. It wasn't just about standing physically. It was about standing for one another, about forming bonds that didn't wither in the face of hardship. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, Jim felt a sense of peace blanket the land. The moon would rise again, and with it, the assurance that he and his neighbors would be ready, always prepared to protect what was rightfully theirs. And as the whispers of crickets filled the night, the soil remained fertile, not just for growth but for unity, strength, and the sheer power of a community that refused to crumble. The moon lit up the night sky, casting a silver glow over the sprawling fields of Maplewood Farm. The air was thick with silence, but underneath that calm veneer, a tension simmered. A lone figure sat on the creaky porch, old Farmer Joe, his face a landscape of weathered lines that told stories of both hard labor and resilience. To anyone passing by, he might have appeared to be just another farmer dozing off after a long day in the fields. But Joe was fully alert, his senses finely tuned to the midnight stillness. He wasn't sleeping at all. He was simply biding his time. Out in the darkness, 3 figures in dark hoodies crept along the edge of the property, their eyes glinting with greed. They moved stealthily, propelled by the thrill of an easy heist. "The old man's probably knocked out," whispered the tallest one, a wiry frame with an undercurrent of bravado. "Yeah, but let's hurry. I heard he's got some good equipment in that barn," the second crook muttered, glancing toward the dimly lit barn door. It stood slightly ajar, an invitation they couldn't resist. The third, shorter and nervous, hesitated, his instincts flaring. "Stop being a baby," the tallest one snapped. "This is easy money." They inched closer, drawing nearer to the warm glow spilling from the barn. Meanwhile, Farmer Joe remained poised, his grip steady on a sturdy baseball bat resting beside him on the porch. This was no ordinary bat. It had been his son's when he was a kid, a tool for both fun and fierce protection. Memories flooded back, laughter shared after long days, and the lessons taught about standing strong against the storms of life. Tonight, that bat would take on a new purpose. As the crooks reached the barn door, Joe felt adrenaline pumping through his veins. The time had come. He stood up, squaring his shoulders and taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on him. He glanced toward the sky, gathering strength from the stars above, and then thundered toward the barn. His voice boomed across the night like a clap of thunder, echoing through the stillness. The crooks whipped around, eyes wide with shock. They had not expected this. "What?" The tallest crook's confidence faltered, his bravado collapsing as Farmer Joe stepped into the light. There was something fierce and unyielding about the old man, a strength born from years of hard work, grit, and determination. "The owner of this land," Joe replied, holding the bat at the ready, embodying the spirit of a protector. For a brief moment, silence hung in the air, thick with tension. The 3 crooks exchanged panicked glances, realizing they had miscalculated their risky adventure. They hadn't prepared for a farmer who refused to back down. The second one urged, but fear now infused his voice, escalating their anxiety. Joe advanced, swinging the bat in a slow, intimidating arc, eyes steady and focused. "You think I'm just going to let you take what I've worked for?" The first crook lunged forward, a misguided attempt to overtake the farmer. But Joe sidestepped, swinging the bat straight toward him. It met the ground with a thud, sending vibrations through the earth that mirrored the adrenaline coursing in Joe's veins. The man followed through with a stumble, his bravado shattered as he staggered back. The other two crooks hesitated, the illusion of control slipping from their grasp. The short one shouted, terror creeping into his heart. The tallest yelled back, but even his voice quivered. The realization of their situation set in like dawn breaking over the horizon. They were not in control at all. Joe stepped forward once more, towering over them like the oak trees lining the property, rooted and unwavering. "You're not going to find any sympathy here." His voice held the type of certainty that sent shivers down their spines. The crooks turned and ran, their hurried footsteps echoing across the land as they fled into the inky darkness. As they vanished from sight, Joe stood there, bat still raised, heart pounding but triumphant. While they may have come looking for tools, what they had encountered was the spirit of a man who had worked tirelessly, night after night, to build a life from the ground up. Farmer Joe felt a surge of pride wash over him. He had faced the threat head-on and emerged stronger, bathed in the glow of his own resolve. In the days that followed, word of the attempted theft spread throughout the small town. Farmers would gather at the diner, sharing tales and laughter over coffee, but they spoke seriously about the lesson learned from Joe's encounter. The stories morphed, exaggerated, as stories often do, but the essence remained. Never underestimate a farmer who has something to protect. Joe took the experience to heart and became proactive. No longer a passive guardian of his land, he fortified his barn and began to prepare for any future threats. He added locks to every door, installed motion sensor lights around the perimeter, and even devised simple alarm systems using old farm equipment. But beyond the physical fortifications, he understood that community was his greatest ally. He reached out to neighboring farmers, inviting them over to share a meal and strategize. "We need to stay vigilant," he said over steaming bowls of stew. Gradually, a network of vigilance formed, a bond undisturbed by the threats outside their doors. They took turns patrolling the fields, sharing stories, laughter, and a sense of unity. That sense of belonging seeped into the very soil, making it rich with strength. Weeks rolled by and the crooks lingered in the shadows, their miscalculations looming like ghosts in the night. The farmers of Maplewood stood firm, undeterred and determined. Joe felt the camaraderie bolster him. Each check on the fields became a testament to resilience. Yet even amidst all the preparations, a part of him remained restless. He knew that shadows could creep back and that thieves were often motivated by desperation. His heart ached for what might have driven those men to such a reckless pursuit. One fateful evening, while on patrol with his neighbor, Sarah, they spotted movement near the edge of the woods. She asked, her eyes narrowing. Joe's heart raced. It could be them. "Stay close," he urged, instinct guiding their footsteps as they moved toward the flicker of light. As they neared, Joe's stomach twisted. There they were, the same thieves, huddled around a small fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. They were talking in hushed whispers, plotting their next move as though he and his neighbors were unaware. "Let's alert the others," Sarah urged, but Joe held her back, considering another option. "No," he whispered. Crouched behind some bushes, the two listened intently, the reality of their situation revealing itself like an unspooled thread. The tallest one recounted their failed attempt and complained about how easy it had seemed before Joe had thrown them off balance. "If we had just gotten in, we would have been set for life," he lamented. The second one scowled. "They're always checking on each other." Joe's heart ached at the desperation in their voices, the weariness in their postures. That night they weren't just thieves, they were men lost in a world that had turned its back on them. In that moment, empathy flowed through him, igniting a powerful thought. What if these men were simply trying to survive? "Let's go home, Joe," Sarah whispered, breaking his reverie. But he hesitated, a flicker of compassion battling against the instincts of survival. With deliberate care, he stepped out of the shadows, revealing himself. The crooks froze, eyes widening as the surprise registered. The tallest crook snapped, stepping back as adrenaline surged through him. "That's not my intention," Joe said, his voice steady, an anchor in the storm brewing around them. "I see you're struggling." At that moment, he felt vulnerability shift between them, an unraveling of hardened exteriors. The crooks looked at one another, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. the shorter one asked, apprehension hanging in the air. Joe took a step closer, closing the gap. "This farm isn't just mine, it's a community. If you need help, we can find a way to get you back on your feet." The disbelief was palpable, but something shifted behind the eyes of the tallest crook. He asked, voice barely above a whisper. Joe nodded. The tension hung thick in the air, weaving a delicate line between fear and hope. Would they accept his offer, or would they flee into the night? The decision hung heavily in the silence, a choice that could change everything. For what felt like an eternity, they weighed their options, caught between desperation and potential redemption. Finally, the tallest crook broke the silence. And just like that, the three men sat down in a circle around the fire, walls crumbling in a way that no one had anticipated. It was an unexpected gathering, farmer and thieves, both individuals shaped by their circumstances, seeking understanding. Hours passed as they shared stories, bearing their souls beneath the stars. Joe spoke of his love for the land, the sweat and tears poured into building a life, while the crooks revealed their struggles, their need for quick cash born from desperation but haunted by regret. By the time dawn broke, illuminating the fields in a warm glow, something remarkable had shifted. They had forged a bond, a connection that transcended fear and animosity. The crooks began to see that there were other ways to survive, and Joe realized he had become a bridge toward hope. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the group made their way back towards the farm. The world felt fresh, new, filled with potential as Farmer Joe led the former thieves back into his community. It wasn't about shielding one's possessions any longer. It was about instilling the belief that even those who stumble can change their path. As they approached the town, neighbors peeked out, astonished at the unlikely parade. Joe held his head high, knowing he had taken a risk but also opened doors releasing shadows that had lingered too long. "Trust is built, not taken," he told them. And as they walked together, he recognized that the real victory that night was in understanding, second chances, and the power of community. The men would wrestle with their past, sure, but they would also learn what it meant to rise together, and Farmer Joe would teach them that every day offered a new chance to flourish in the light. With the sun shining bright, the horizon filled with hope, Joe had transformed not just his own spirit, but ignited a ripple effect that would weave through the heart of Maplewood, enriching the soil that bound them all. And as he stood, surrounded by new allies, the farmer felt fortified, a guardian now not just of his land, but of futures yet unwritten. Under the glimmer of a full moon, the fields of Pine Grove Farm stretched like a dark sea, waves of corn swaying gently in the night breeze. The air was thick with stillness, the kind that seems to amplify even the tiniest sounds. If you listened closely, you could hear the faint rustle of grass and the distant hoot of an owl, but all that peace masked an uneasiness lurking just beneath the surface. Unbeknownst to the farmer, Thomas Granger, three figures were prowling on the outskirts of his property. These were not mere passers-by. They were seasoned crooks, drawn by the promise of an easy score. "Look at that old farmhouse," the first one whispered, eyes gleaming with greed. "Yeah, let's get in and out fast," the second one replied, nudging the third, who seemed more apprehensive. "Come on, Tim." Tim glanced uncertainly at his companions but swallowed his doubts. They had been hitting farms all summer, and so far, luck had been on their side. They believed they could outwit anyone, especially a tired farmer. But what they didn't know was that Thomas had been awake for hours, patiently waiting with his heart pounding in rhythm with the night. He had seen the signs, the tire tracks near his fields, the whispers among neighbors about strange happenings. He wasn't just a simple farmer, he was a strategist, honed by years of hard work and vigilance. As the trio edged closer to the barn, Thomas clenched his fists around the wooden handle of an old pitchfork, its prongs dull but sturdy. The pitchfork was more than just a tool. It was a symbol of his resolve, a reminder of the many battles he had fought, not just against nature, but against those who would threaten his hard-earned way of life. "Let's go," the first crook urged, edging towards the barn door. From the safety of the porch, Thomas's eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting its prey. He could hear their hushed whispers cut through the quiet night air. "They think I'm asleep," he he muttered under his breath, a fire igniting in his chest. With each careful step, Thomas approached the barn, staying low and quiet. He knew the ground like the back of his hand, each creak and crack adding to the tension swirling within him. Just as the Crooks were about to slip through the barn door, Thomas sprang into action, bursting from the shadows. He bellowed, his voice echoing through the night like thunder. The Crooks froze, caught off guard, their eyes wide with shock. The tallest one stammered, his bravado swiftly evaporating. "I'm the owner of this farm and you're trespassing," Thomas declared, raising the pitchfork like a knight wielding his sword. But the thieves were not accustomed to backing down, even when faced with a formidable opponent. One of them hissed, desperation edging his voice. They began to work their way around, trying to flank him. Thomas tightened his grip, reminding himself of every stubborn battle he had ever faced. "I won't let you take what's mine," he shouted, using the pitchfork to thrust into the ground in front of him, sending up a spray of dirt. The noise reverberated, shattering their confidence. The nervous one yelled, turning on his heel as panic surged through them. They scrambled backward, faces pale and dismayed. Thomas sneered, taking a step forward. The pitchfork was still raised, a barrier between his way of life and their greed. The three men stumbled over each other in their haste to escape, their earlier bravado extinguished in the face of real danger. Once they disappeared into the night, Thomas lowered the pitchfork, breathing heavily as the adrenaline faded. He stood at the barn doorway, heart racing but filled with an overwhelming sense of pride. It wasn't just about defending his tools and crops. He had stood firm for everything he loved. In the days that followed, the tale of Thomas's confrontation spread throughout the small community like wildfire. At the diner, fellow farmers gathered, their voices low as they shared the story, each adding a little embellishment, a whisper here, a chortle there. The laughter filled the room, but it was rooted in a firm understanding that they all needed to look out for one another. One morning, as the sun broke across the horizon, painting the sky orange and gold, Thomas decided it was time to act. The threat wasn't just over, it could return. He gathered his neighbors for a meeting, everyone seated around a rough-hewn table piled with coffee cups and half-eaten biscuits. "We need to come together," he spoke, his voice steady. "It's not just about me guarding my own farm. These thieves will try to hit us all." Nods of agreement filled the air, and soon they were brainstorming strategies. Adding lights? Yes. Setting up a watch rotation? Absolutely. Combining their resources made them stronger, and just like that, a bond began to form, a community ready to stand together. Weeks turned into months, and the autumn winds began to blow. The air was filled with the earthy scent of harvest, but along with that came an unshakable vigilance. Each farmer took turns patrolling, sharing stories and laughter, the bond of a united front deepening with every shared meal and late-night watch. Then, one fateful night, the very thing they had prepared for came to fruition. As Thomas patrolled the fields with a flashlight in hand, a figure darted from the edge of the woods. He squinted, heart racing, focused on the movement. He shouted, recognizing the younger thief who had once run from him. The shock was evident as Thomas stepped forward, flashlights illuminating the shadows around them. Tim stammered, eyes wide with both fear and desperation. His clothes were tattered, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. Thomas questioned, his heart racing for a different reason now. "Things got bad. The guys I was with, they didn't care about anything but money. They thought they could come back and take more. I thought I could convince them to avoid it, but they don't listen to me anymore." Tim's voice cracked as he shared his truth, vulnerability spilling out in front of the very man he once tried to rob. Thomas paused, assimilating the boy's words. Reluctance surged, but a flicker of empathy danced within him. What if Tim was telling the truth? What if he had come to seek a different path? "Come with me," Thomas instructed, sensing an opportunity to make a difference. Together, they headed back to the farmhouse where Thomas called the other farmers. The shock in their eyes was palpable when Tim stood before them. "This is the boy I confronted before," Thomas explained, laying the groundwork for understanding. "He wants to change," Thomas continued, his voice firm but kind. Tim gulped as he awaited their reactions, a tremor of fear settling in his stomach. But one by one they spoke up, voices that rang with familiarity mixed with hesitance. "Everyone deserves a second chance," said Sarah, one of the farmers, recalling her own struggles. "What do you say, Tim?" Thomas asked, eyes searching the young man's face. "Yes, I'll do anything," Tim implored, a sense of desperation mingling with hope. Over the course of weeks, Tim became part of the community he once threatened. At first he was shy and uncertain, but slowly, as they included him in their daily routines, that wall began to crumble. Thomas took him under his wing, teaching him the ropes of farming, the joys of growing something from nothing. As the crops flourished, so did Tim's spirit. He found purpose in hard work, a camaraderie in shared meals and laughter. The community rallied around him, integrating him not just as a worker but as someone who belonged. Time passed and Tim grew more confident, shedding the past that had weighed him down. As winter approached, he stood proudly among the farmers, a testament to their belief in redemption. Then, on a crisp December night, as the stars twinkled overhead, they held a gathering to celebrate a successful harvest. Laughter echoed through the air, stories were shared, and cups were raised in toast to resilience and community. As Tim looked around, he recalled the dark days when he thought his life would be defined by choices made in anger and fear. "Thank you for believing in me," he said, his voice steady yet full of emotion. "I was lost and I didn't know if there was a way back." Thomas smiled, a gleam of pride in his eyes. "You earned this, Tim." In that moment, among friends and newfound family, Tim realized he had taken his first steps toward healing. The nights of fear and theft were behind him, replaced with the promise of a future built on hard work and community. Farmer Thomas had not only guarded his land but had cultivated a richer life for everyone. As seasons changed, the friendship between the farmers and Tim flourished, blossoming into a bond that no thief could shatter. Each day marked renewal, stories exchanged over troughs of cow feed, laughter drifting on the breeze, and the echo of hard work bringing purpose to their lives. The Crooks, who once thought they could prey on the vulnerable, had unknowingly ignited a strength that transformed a community into something unbreakable. And for Thomas, the battle was never just about defending tools. It was about faith in the land, faith in the power of redemption, and above all else, faith in one another. Through all the trials, the true victory lingered like the warmth of the sun rising over Pine Grove Farm, filling the land with hope, a reminder that preparation often leads to unexpected turns of fate. The moon hung heavy in the midnight sky, a pale guardian watching over the vast fields of Maplewood Farm. The air was still, thick with the earthy scent of moist soil and night-blooming flowers. To the casual observer, all seemed peaceful, but lurking beneath that tranquil surface was an undercurrent of tension. 3 figures moved like phantoms through the rows of corn, shadows slipping silently between the stalks. They paused now and then, checking their surroundings as they made their way toward the old barn. "Looks like that old farmer's knocked out," one of them whispered, his voice laced with anticipation. "Just grab the tools and let's go," urged the second crook, casting nervous looks over his shoulder. They were clearly agitated, and it showed in their hurried movements. Little did they know that the farmer, Joe Thompson, was very much awake, perched silently on his porch, breathing in the crisp night air. He had sensed something was amiss. The earlier signs, the odd tire tracks, the hushed whispers in town had put him on high alert. Joe was no ordinary farmer. Years of struggle and toil had sharpened his instincts, and he knew when to stay alert. As the Crooks drew closer to the barn, Joe tightened his grip on the baseball bat resting against the porch railing. It had been his son's bat, worn and chipped but sturdy. Memories flooded back to him, the nights spent teaching his son how to swing it, how to stand tall and defend what mattered. "Not tonight," Joe muttered under his breath, his heart racing with determination. He slid off the porch and crept toward the shadows of the barn. The Crooks slipped through the barn door, their voices excited and reckless. One exclaimed, rummaging through the tools scattered about. Just then, a sharp crack echoed through the silence like thunder. Joe swung the bat against the ground hard enough to make the wood splinter with the impact. "Hey!" he shouted, stepping into the dim light of the barn. The 3 figures froze, eyes widening in disbelief. They hadn't expected a confrontation, especially not from a lone farmer. The tallest one spat, attempting to regain composure amidst the chaos. "I'm the owner of this farm," Joe stated firmly, stepping closer, bat held high. "And you're trespassing." In that moment the tension was palpable. The air crackled with uncertainty and fear. Joe stood tall, his heart pounding, but a resolute calm washed over him. He had fought battles before against nature, against loss, against the struggles of life. This was just one more confrontation, but one with much higher stakes. "Come on, guys," the tattooed crook urged, his bravado faltering, revealing the crack in his confidence. But Joe didn't hesitate. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, he swung the bat, sending it crashing against the wooden wall with a deafening thud. The crooks stumbled back, their bravado evaporating. The tallest one shouted, turning on his heels and bolting toward the exit, panic now their only companion. As the three fled into the night, Joe stood firm, his breath coming in heavy gasps. He had defended his land, but he knew this wasn't over. For every successful stand, there was the potential for future threats. As the adrenaline wore off, confusion mingled with a rush of triumphant pride. He had fought back and won the first battle, but shadows of uncertainty hung over him, and it was then that it struck him. The crooks would surely come back. They always did. In the days that followed, the story of Joe's confrontation rippled through the small community. Farmers gathered at the local diner, their voices low but filled with excitement as they shared tales of the fearless farmer who had stood against thieves. "You put those punks in their place," Mike, a fellow farmer, laughed, slapping Joe on the back. Word spread quickly, and with it came a wave of support. Everybody wanted to ensure they were ready for anything. Joe knew he had to take concrete steps to guard his land, not just for himself but for the community as well. One evening, he called a meeting at his farm. Farmers arrived, eyes glimmering with determination, ready to strategize. "These guys won't just vanish," Joe said, his voice ringing with authority. "We need to come together as a community." The group nodded in agreement, tossing around ideas, additional lighting, patrol schedules, and ways to reinforce barn doors. They discussed it all, fueled by a fierce camaraderie. As the season changed, the weather grew colder, but the nights were filled with purpose. Joe and his neighbors took turns walking patrols around the fields, sharing meals and laughter under the stars. The community became stronger, fortified by the bond of standing up to threats together. But deep down, Joe felt the weight of what might come. He knew the crooks wouldn't simply abandon their plans. They were desperate, and desperate people are often the most dangerous. One fateful night, while on patrol, Joe felt a surge of unease course through him. Something was off. He gripped his flashlight tightly and scanned the horizon, squinting into the darkness. Just then, a rustle broke the stillness, and he turned sharply, zeroing in on the sound. Before he could react, movement flicked at the edge of his vision. A shadow darted between the trees. Joe's heart raced, muscles tensing. He called, a surge of adrenaline elevating his senses. Silence enveloped him, thick and unsettling. Then, without warning, three figures lunged from the tree line, charging straight toward him. It was them, the same trio from before. They wore masks this time, their intentions cloaked in darkness. The tallest one sneered, raising a crowbar, the glint of metal catching the moonlight. Joe's instincts kicked in. He raised the flashlight, aiming its beam directly into the eyes of the approaching thieves. He roared, heart pounding against his chest like a drum. They hesitated, caught momentarily off guard by his fierce countenance. The tattooed one growled, trying to stall for time, but there was no time to hesitate. Joe knew he had to act fast. He swung the flashlight toward them, temporarily blinding them as he darted toward the barn. "You want to fight?" The crooks gave chase, sprinting after him as he dashed around the barn, seeking his trusty pitchfork. His heart raced as he grabbed it, feeling its weight solidly in his hands once more, a weapon of protection forged through years of labor and struggle. As they approached, Joe spun around to face them, the pitchfork poised and ready. "You think you can just take from me again?" The thieves exchanged glances, uncertainty washing over them. In their eyes, Joe saw it, the fear creeping in, though they tried desperately to mask it. They had underestimated him before, and now they were realizing the gravity of their mistake. In an instant, chaos erupted. The tallest guy rushed forward, crowbar swinging, but Joe sidestepped, using his pitchfork to block the blow. It was a swift movement practiced by years of hard work on the farm. The tattooed thief screamed, rage overtaking fear as they all lunged at once, believing strength in numbers would win the day. But Joe wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for everyone who worked the land, for the community that had rallied around him. He thrust the pitchfork forward, catching one of the attackers in the leg as he tried to grapple Joe from the side. A howl of pain echoed through the air as the man crumpled, losing his balance and dragging down the tattooed one along with him. 2 down, but not out of the woods yet. Joe turned to face the last remaining crook, whose eyes now betrayed panic. Joe shouted, recalling the strength within him, the power to stand against any odds. But just as the final confrontation mounted, a distant noise broke through the tension, the unmistakable sound of sirens wailing in the distance, growing louder by the second. The unwavering conviction in Joe's heart clashed with the piercing reality. They had called for backup. The taller crook screamed, adrenaline flooding their veins as they scrambled backward, eyes wild and desperate. In that moment, Joe felt a rush of triumph, knowing he had stood his ground, but as he watched them retreat into the night, a sinking feeling took hold of him. They hadn't merely left, they had vanished into the shadows, and now he faced a new challenge, the impending chaos that was about to unfold. As the sirens drew closer, Joe's heart raced, not just from the adrenaline of the confrontation, but from the uncertainty of what was coming next. Would these crooks return? Would they come back looking for revenge? Just as he thought he had won the battle, the true conflict loomed on the horizon, a whisper of a storm gathering strength. And he knew, as he stood there, bathed in the fading moonlight, that the fight for his land and community was far from over.